Hello, my name's Claire Barker. I'm the General Manager of Entoura, an Australian-based medicinal cannabis supplier who focuses on education and research and patient access for medicinal cannabis. I'm going to talk to you today about patient access for medicinal cannabis and how to best speak to your doctor about medicinal cannabis. The thing we need to remember about medicinal cannabis is it's currently an unapproved medicine in Australia for most of the products available. There currently are 2 approved products, Sativex for multiple sclerosis and Epidiolex for epilepsy Dravet syndrome. So when looking at medicinal cannabis, you have to understand that it is not a frontline treatment. It is a treatment that your doctor may prescribe for you, or as a doctor you may prescribe for your patients based on the medical history of the patient, other treatments that have been tried and unsuccessful, or other treatments where the side effects have been intolerable. And the things we're talking about in the injured worker space is you can be looking at things where a lot of the pain medications are not tolerable by patients, or the side effects are quite high, or there's actually high addiction potential. So that's very much a conversation about the specialist or the doctor deciding that other options have been tried and that medicinal cannabis is worth trying with this patient to see whether we can get a better outcome for the patient. So there currently are 3 major pathways that you can access the unapproved medicinal cannabis in Australia. One of the pathways is a special access scheme, or SASB approval. And this is where the doctor will actually apply to TGA to get approval to prescribe a particular medicinal cannabis product for a specific patient in the specific circumstances. So this is a one-to-one-to-one relationship, and that doctor will actually have assessed why they believe that this unapproved medicine is the best treatment option for the patient when there are other potential options available on the market. And it's up to the doctor to explain that circumstance and actually therefore get the approval from TGA for that. The second pathway is what is called an authorised prescriber scheme. With the authorised prescriber scheme, it's for where doctors have had experience prescribing medicinal cannabis. They have a history of doing that prescription through the special access scheme. They've undertaken some education with how to actually prescribe medicinal cannabis, its mechanism of actions, precautions, understanding how this could actually potentially impact on the patient. And once they've got this history and experience, they can apply to a Human Research and Ethics Committee to get approval as an authorised prescriber. This is a lengthy process and a lot of detail is needed to be provided to the Ethics Committee. But what you then get is you get approval for that prescriber to be able to prescribe for a class of patients for individually listed products, but it could be multiple products, for a specific age group and for specific conditions. So, for example, you might have 5 different products listed, generally for over 18-year-old people, and you might list for 7 or 8 different conditions that you might like to prescribe for. Once that has been assessed by the Ethics Committee, this is then submitted to TGA. TGA undertakes the review, and the doctor then is able to write a prescription for that product and send that straight to pharmacy. They're not having to write the individual justification for each patient. There are 6 monthly reporting requirements for the doctor to provide reports both to the HREC and to the TGA for this. But that does speed the process up a little bit. The other general way to actually get access to medicinal cannabis in Australia is through clinical trial. And so companies like ourselves, we actually have products within an observational trial. So that means we're actually collecting data for people who are prescribed the product. They have a set criteria of information they provide back, but they do know they're on the cannabis, they know the purpose of it, and they know their dosing. We also have products that are into what is called a randomised control trial, placebo-controlled. So that means that the patients are either on the active product or a placebo product. They're unsure which one it is. They actually go through the period of treatment. We collect the data. And sometimes that is also a crossover, so the patients may actually go and then be on swap over and then have the active or the placebos first or second. So for accessing a clinical trial, there is a number of trials that are available on the Australian New Zealand Clinical Trial Register, so you can see them there, or a lot of the medicinal cannabis companies will have the details of those trials on their web pages so you can see that. The other space that you will be able to access medicinal cannabis, and that is a low-dose CBD product, is through your pharmacist. On the 1st of February, the poison standard which governs the scheduling of medicines was updated to allow for an S3 low-dose CBD product to be available. And what an S3 is that's a pharmacist-only medication. So that means that you can go into your pharmacy, have a consultation with your pharmacist, and if you meet the criteria for the product, you will be able to access the product, the medicinal cannabis. There are some caveats that were put onto that, and the biggest one was that they would not accept unapproved medicines and that the products must be registered with TGA. So where we sit at the moment is that is actually at least a 11-month process for review. And with that, TGA confirmed that as of the April this year, no applications had been put through. So we are looking at least into the middle of next year before those products would be available. And the reason for that is there is a requirement for quite extensive clinical data to be submitted as part of the packages for review with TGA. Companies, as I've mentioned, such as Entoura, are generating that data through the clinic, but we still need to actually assess the data, review it and put it together in what is called a dossier for submission. So there is that change that has been made through the legislative pathways, but practically there is no product available to access via the pharmacy. So watch this space, and into 2022, you'll start seeing some S3 or pharmacist-only low-dose CBD products come available on the market. The important thing to think about for that, though, is that those products are generally pharmacist-only products, aren't the products that you would use for chronic conditions. They are generally your less serious, self-limiting type of conditions. So the question about whether they're suitable when you're in the injured worker space for longer term chronic conditions will be something that you still would more likely need to have a conversation with your doctor about, and the pharmacist will ask you those questions next year when they've got product available for you. Now, in saying that, there is still the access pathways available for the two registered products I mentioned, and so a doctor can just prescribe them. And some really great news for that, the Epidiolex product, which is for Dravet syndrome, has just been recently approved on the PBS. So that means that there's about 160 patients in Australia who have Dravet syndrome, and they will now have access to a PBS-listed medicinal cannabis product. I think that's great. It's a first product, and it does mean that once we get more clinical data, more of these products will be submitted to TGA and to the government to look for PBS listing. So not there at the moment. So at the moment, one of the things you do need to consider with medicinal cannabis is that it is not a PBS-listed product, so the unapproved medicines will actually need to be accessed through your own private funding. I will step into a little bit about other programs where you might actually be able to access some support for your medicinal cannabis. With medicinal cannabis, the prescribing process for the unapproved medicine is slightly different across different states within Australia. And currently in Tasmania, it's only medical specialists who actually are able to apply to prescribe medicinal cannabis. The great news is that it was announced earlier this year that that's going to change from 1 July. So from 1 July, GPs in Tasmania will also be able to prescribe medicinal cannabis. Now, throughout the rest of Australia, GPs can prescribe as well as specialists. There are differences in state-based legislation about the type of cannabis that they can be prescribed by certain specialists or by certain doctors, etc. And it's best to check your state regulations if you're a doctor prescribing in those states. But from a patient's perspective, that should be taken care of by your doctor, and they will just understand, and you will access the product in exactly the same way. So as a patient, if you're thinking that medicinal cannabis might be something for you, again, remembering it's an unapproved medicine, I'd suggest you go to the TGA website. They have some really great resources on there, including short videos about the process for accessing medicinal cannabis. But certainly if you've gone down that pathway, the next step is to have the conversation with your doctor, or the doctor may be the person who's actually started this conversation with you. There are a number of doctors who are willing to prescribe but don't have the knowledge to prescribe at this point in time. For those doctors, there is a large amount of resources available, and there are education institutions who provide that education. There is also a lot of webinars that are online these days. Medicinal cannabis companies also provide a lot of education. With Entoura, we provide education on a very practical level about how to complete the step-by-step processes, but also from the background understanding of the medical elements of cannabis and how it works in the system. So that is available for doctors who are curious. If your doctor really does not want to prescribe cannabis, there are also cannabis clinics that are available for people to access medicinal cannabis. So you'll be able to find access to those if you are looking out for those. So now I want to talk to you about the cost of medicinal cannabis. So Fresh Leaf Analytics have actually put reports out periodically over the last couple of years, and their latest report was come out for the last 6 months. And it's indicating that still you're around, the cost of medicinal cannabis for a patient can come around to that $5 to $10 a day. It does actually depend on what condition you have and other elements about your dosage and the product selection that has been chosen for you. But that is affordable for some people and not for others. So therefore a question that's often asked is it PBS funded? Can I access it through my health insurance? is there other ways of getting funding for your medicinal cannabis? So as I've mentioned, the PBS, there is only the one product on there for one particular condition. With regard to your private health insurance, there is a large number of health insurers who do actually cover medicinal cannabis. So with your health insurers, honolulu.com.au did some research last year and actually determined with the health insurers around about 5% of them will cover medicinal cannabis as a registered product. Around about 75% of them will cover for an unregistered product, which leaves about 20% that will not cover medicinal cannabis at all. There is varying degrees of the dollar value that they will cover per script and also varying degrees of the actual cap per year that they will cover. And it will also sometimes depend on the level of cover you have. But it's worth talking to your private health insurance about it. If you don't get answers straight away, please dig a little bit because not all of the frontline phone people at the health insurers have the details on this. As I've mentioned, 75% of health insurance companies here in Australia will cover some degree of medicinal cannabis. Another way that people have potentially looked to seek funding for their medicinal cannabis is through the NDIS. Now, I can say that we have heard reports of people who have got funding through the NDIS, though I do tell you this is not an easy process. It really talks about a tenacious caseworker, and it's probably getting more and more difficult, which is a little bit odd. But it's one of those things that it is possible, but it's not an easy pathway to get funding through the NDIS. Another area of potential funding for medicinal cannabis patients is the DVA. So the DVA does have a defined process for assessing whether a patient can be funded for medicinal cannabis, and they have a set list of conditions that they will actually provide funding for and a set of exclusions. So chronic pain is one of the conditions that you can get access to medicinal cannabis through the DVA. There is a process about that you need to go through. That process does include and must include a medical specialist. So your GP can be the person who submits the application for that funding. But to get that funding, the pain specialist involved must provide a letter of support or be the person who is applying. With that, again, the DVA is looking to understand why medicinal cannabis is being used, why conventional medicines can't be used, and they're looking to get at least 3 monthly reporting on the effectiveness of the treatment. Work cover, and that's obviously when we're talking about injured workers, that's probably one of the biggest spaces that we want to talk about. So the question is, would medicinal cannabis be covered through work cover? And the answer is it's not excluded. And the best way to talk about this is through a couple of published articles from 2 different law firms, and these are based out of New South Wales. So one of the cases that I want to talk you through was actually published by Turks Legal, and this is from February in 2020. So the summary of the decision was the Workers' Compensation Commission has determined that the prescription of medicinal cannabis can fall within the definition of medical and related treatment for the purposes of Section 59 of the Workers' Compensation Act 1987. So that's the first answer. It is possible, so certainly it's not excluded from being covered, but it doesn't mean that it will be covered. The second piece of information that's been published, and this was from February of this year, was from Bhartia Perry Lawyers. And again, it reiterated the same element that based on the Workers' Compensation Act in 1997, that the medicinal cannabis funding is not precluded. However, they've gone into a little bit more detail about the fact that there needs to be clear definition of why you would be applying for funding. Some of the key questions that they have outlined that need to be answered or need to be put into the application through work cover is the appropriateness of the particular treatment, the availability of alternate treatment. So again, why are you choosing this unapproved medicine when there might be other treatments available? What is the cost of the treatment? And then this is a really probably the big piece is what is the actual or potential effectiveness of the treatment? The really good news for people with chronic pain is there's a lot of published data for the use of medicinal cannabis with chronic pain. However, the doctors noting the treatment choices for this particular patient would need to outline why the other conventional treatments aren't suitable. And again, it is really up to the acceptance of other medical experts about it. So the people who are doing the assessment might actually go to other medical experts to see whether they believe that this is the right treatment for this particular patient. So in summary, it's not precluded to have coverage of medicinal cannabis in a workers' compensation claim, but it is not a given that it will get approved, and there does need to be a decent amount of justification for why it is suitable for the patient who is applying. Hopefully what I've been able to do today is explain a little bit to you about the way that medicinal cannabis can be accessed in Australia, reiterating the fact that it is an unapproved medicine, so it is not a first-line treatment. It is something that can only be considered after other treatments have been tried and proven ineffective for a patient. Look, I've aimed to take you through the three major pathways for accessing this unapproved medicine. Look a little bit about the funding options, in particular around work cover funding. The other thing I just want to reiterate, there's a lot of really great resources out there available. At Entoura, we've got our general website. We've also got particular healthcare practitioners, medical specialist portals that you can log in and register, which will give you a lot more detailed information. And we also have a patient portal, which has a lot of frequently asked questions and information that patients can access. The other resources that are really valuable to medical practitioners and to patients is TGA. They have some great guidance documents on their website. Also, NPS Medicine Wise is a site that actually has some really good guidance documents for both the healthcare practitioners and professionals as well as patients on medicinal cannabis. I've mentioned the Entoura website. Another great point of access for patients is honolulu.com.au, where there's various articles on things like driving, different access to medicinal cannabis, etc. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation today. I hope you walk away knowing a little bit more about medicinal cannabis and how that can actually assist in the injured worker space. And I wish you well on your journey to recovery or your prescribing of medicinal cannabis.